welcome everybody to the January 28th, 2025 meeting of the Planning Board. Because we have a remote participant, we will do a roll call vote to get us started. Pat Nelson, are you here? I see her lips moving saying she's here.
I'm here.
Awesome. And then we'll just go down the line. Mark Giddings here.
Sue Felton
Here, Linda Miller here.
Rob Almeida here, Andrew Boardman here. Awesome, efficiency. And with that, we will move on to our first agenda item, which is listed here as administrative business, public comment. So public comment is limited to up to 15 minutes, no more than 3 minutes allocated to any one speaker. Public comment is limited to those items which are not on the agenda. The agenda tonight does include all of our bylaw discussions, zoning bylaw amendments. So if there's anything else that anyone would like to bring up, you are welcome to do so now. And seeing nothing in the room and nothing online, we will move on to a discussion of the 2025 ATM zoning bylaw amendments.
You do have the chair of the Economic Vitality Committee, Mike Lawson, and Amy Graney, the Economic Vitality Manager, here to talk about two of the articles, and you also have Matt Johnson here with the Concord Housing Foundation to run through about the PRD warrant article. So I don't know if you want to take those first.
Sure, we can take those two first. Who's ever willing to speak first, I guess. Why don't you guys go ahead?
Think about Ray.
Never.
You don't have anything to say, or?
I will say only, I'm very appreciative of the planning board taking the time to, review this proposed zoning amendment, and I know you've looked at it, I know you have some concerns, but I'm greatly appreciative of the time you spent. I think Elizabeth has provided the latest version of it, that we have no comments or edits to make on it, so thank you very much.
So I didn't know, from the last meeting, I know the EBC was gonna go, talk to people and have information. I didn't know if you wanted to give an update on conversations you had, or.
I've heard some folks have concerns, but overall people are really liking the way it supports use of historic properties, that it advances our commercial districts. Folks are seeing opportunities for the ease of being able to switch between uses, and that helps limit the time between transitions of businesses. It helps maximize the activity within the existing properties to their highest and best use. So overall, I've heard a lot of positive comments about it. I know that some folks were a little concerned that it wasn't, that it might be a little challenging for people to understand. But I did a presentation to Concord After 60 group, and they were very supportive of the amendment. I chatted with them about both of the amendments, and they thought both were a good idea. And I will be on the agenda for the Transportation Advisory Committee on Thursday. So we're kind of starting that outreach effort now.
And it's our understanding that at your public hearing, we'll make the presentation for that article, right? And then the planning board will take its formal action following the public hearing. Correct?
Yeah, so generally it's not till after the public hearing in which the board then develops its written recommendation to town meeting,
Right.
and takes their votes on whether to
Yeah, that's your normal.
recommend affirmative action or no action.
Got it.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm muting, I'm sorry.
No worries. So the draft bylaw that was sent to the board, there been no changes other than some, minor formatting and edits that Linda and Sue pick up. So I didn't know if you wanted to bring up each of the articles and just run through it one more time. At your next meeting on February 11th, the board will need to actually take a vote on final warrant article language, and whether, to move forward to support putting the article, on the warrant, submitting it for the warrant.
Wait, which articles? We're talking about the combined business residence. Commercial
So
districts
just the
parking
commercial,
requirements. Yeah.
commercial districts parking requirement, and then there's the accessory retail
And
in
yeah.
industrial zone district.
Okay,
Those
thank
two,
you.
are the two that the EBC
I got
is
nothing.
moving forward.
And when does the warrant close?
The warrant closes, February 19th. I will be on vacation from February 14th to February 28th.
Well deserved.
So the 11th is
It's-
the
speak now,
day.
Is the day.
Not to say that they're, even after the public hearing, if the, issues or concerns are raised, that can be addressed through amendments. The board would make those, as part of a motion on the floor of town meeting.
So do we have any comments about it, I guess? I mean, we've all read through it, okay?
Oh, well, we might have wanted, I guess we should open it up to discussion of the board first, related to if anyone has any thoughts or comments. I feel like we've read it a bunch of times and are generally in agreement with. I haven't seen anybody really object, so I don't know if there are any other comments before we open it up to the broader. Do we need to see it again for any reason? I don't think so. It's not changing. This isn't one that's been edited profusely. It's just kind of tweaked slightly and.
I reviewed them today. I'm comfortable with them in their current form.
Great. So then I will open it up to the rest of the room, I guess.
I was just gonna
Oh,
say,
sorry.
did you wanna talk about the date of the hearing? Has it,
I know it was on the select board's agenda for last night. I did not get an email or confirmation that they accepted it. I believe the.
We
town
did.
moderator-
We
Oh,
did
good.
accept it, so you're good for the 9th, I think, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Whew, okay.
We weren't
Wait.
standalone anymore, so it was part of
May
the
9th?
broader.
No, April
April.
9th
April 9th.
will be the planning board public hearing. So we will start to advertise that and put it on our agenda and news and notices and start. So I guess from now to then, make that as a general announcement.
Yeah.
Because the warrant is scheduled to be mailed on April 2nd. So,
and at the public hearing, how do you want people to give the presentation? Just a copy of the warrant article or motion or,
so the presentations at the public hearing is basically your run through for your presentation for town meeting.
And
So-
we still haven't gotten to the part where we decide who's doing which articles. But we can do that after the warrant closes?
You
We can do
can do it on
whenever.
February 11th.
Yeah.
You guys can, rock, paper, scissors for, who wants what. But then, I will start, we have the standard required format for town meeting and, I have last year's for the housekeeping, so that one will be easy to put together, but then we'll start drafting at least the planning board's articles. And, I don't know if, I know Matt's already got his, and so I don't know if you want to draft your own, or I can start a draft presentation for you in the format.
Or maybe seeing what the format is, we could.
Yeah, there's a standard format for town meeting, yeah.
There's a PowerPoint template that you can
Yeah.
download. I see there's a question.
Yeah,
So. Sven's been very patient, so just wanted to, before we start opening it up to everybody, I know had a comment, so I just wanna open up the floor there, so go ahead.
Yeah, Sven Nuvo, 50 Penn. Public Works Commission was speaking on my own behalf, just some clarifying questions. So on the parking side, so if suddenly residential is used, I assume there will be kind of overnight parking requirements. And given there's not more offsite, so where if there's start to park offsite overnight, the town has a prohibition of on-street parking overnight for the winter months. So that somehow needs to, I think, be considered what that means if suddenly there's a overnight street parking for residents in that respective districts. Another kind of more question on my end is how do kind of measure for unintended consequences. So it reads right now like by right. I'm just wondering if it would be better to have this kind of by special permit, just to safeguard against things that have not been foreseen, or I assume reading through this, if the business already or the property already has a waiver for parking requirements, does this waiver, that existing waiver for parking requirements, they roll over to the new use and suddenly this thing doesn't match up? So I'm more concerned about unintended consequences here and how this looks, and again, the winter service and street overnight parking.
Go ahead, I mean,
So I think it would probably be helpful, not the overnight parking, that's outside of the purview of the planning board or zoning. That's a select board and public works policy discussion, question or decision, because that's public parking. So that would not be something that the planning board could regulate, or town meeting could adopt as part of zoning, because that.
But it's more that you will have a need for on-street parking. If I think of, let's say, here, the structure on Main Street, you suddenly have residential on top floors. Where are they parking overnight?
So I guess my question is now gonna be clarifying. So are you talking about the proposal regarding commercial parking?
But it is.
Which,
Is that if you're converting this and suddenly have commercial and residential, then you have residential.
But which article are you specifically addressing?
is it article, is it the section? It's the commercial district parking requirements, is that the one? Yeah,
Mhm.
so that, unless I'm completely mistaken, was contemplating a conversion of just business to business.
no.
No, but it's a change use, and so would not, if someone adds extra floors to a building,
No,
that is
take the
different.
existing floor space and convert it in residential.
Yeah.
That's how, at least
Right.
reads like that.
So that is in there, so I think, that's probably a good question. Along with your other question, to put in an email to myself and to Mimi. And, they can start thinking about that and, come up with an appropriate answer or response, whether it's in their presentation or, information to address that concern.
It's an important point to clarify. In our previous discussions in planning board meetings, we have discussed how if someone converts to apartments and rents them out with no parking, they are going to lose all of their tenants who have nowhere to park in winter. And that,
Other towns show that they're starting to drive around and find parking spots or just park overnight anyway.
then they
So-
would get their cars towed.
Yeah, we have to,
It's a concern. There's no
Yeah,
question about it.
yes.
Okay, so-
You don't have to come as a solution, it's just.
Yeah.
So let's,
No,
let's
yeah.
address it,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The heart of this was more about allowing businesses to change use without having to come before us, okay? So that it doesn't hamper the ability to rent space in the commercial area when it goes from a gift shop to, you know, some other use, okay?
Yeah, it was Fat Face to Blue Mercury needed to come before us to have a store that was exactly the same size and exactly the same foot traffic, just felt very odd.
Yeah, but it reads broader. than-
No, it is broader than that, yes, but that's also partially in not having a parking requirement, the thought being that potentially there could be some residential uses downtown where the landlord would have to deal with the parking issue if they, or the resident would, it would be on the resident. But that the idea being that it would not be prohibiting those uses, simply because we need a space for a car. That it becomes sort of a private problem.
Generally, from a planning perspective, you have the requirements in the zoning bylaw working in tandem and cooperatively with the policy side of public parking. So, you know, that may be a conversation that kind of has to be more nailed down as part of that bylaw. But, after this, you know, the board is looking at, amending the joint parking requirement in zoning, to be, you know, more flexible and consistent with industry standards, looking at uses and when those uses have their high peaks in parking and being able to, you know, accommodate parking for different uses, including offsite. So, let's say somebody in downtown Concord Center converts the second floor to residential, but behind, you know, Fritz and Gigi's, you know, something else goes there where, you know, they have excess parking, and so that mixed use could, you know, realistically have offsite parking and have an agreement for there. Currently, you know, that's not an option in the zoning bylaw. So that is also amending the joint parking works well with, you know, this parking amendment to kind of help address that public parking, you know, concern. So it may be, once all of these articles get, you know, if they get submitted to the warrant, you know, then that concern can also help be addressed in that manner as well. And then I forgot what your other concern was already.
Special
By right
permit versus
versus
by
special
right,
permit.
but we had,
Oh,
but Andrew mentioned
Yeah.
this, that it's onerous for business to have to go through the special permit process. It's time consuming and raises their costs. And the Economic Vitality Committee is trying to make it easier for businesses to turn
So if there's
over.
already a parking waiver in place, that should carry through
That's correct.
automatically,
But the
no
way it
matter
is-
what
way it is
other
now,
business.
if
is
there's a
coming in.
change in usage now, they have to come before us, okay? And that's become cumbersome, okay? We still have the right, if we do that, and there's a problem down the road, to readdress the issue, okay? So it isn't, you know, if there is an unintended consequences,
Okay.
we still have an opportunity to fix the problem. Okay?
I wonder sometimes what are some of the unintended consequences that come to mind? And oftentimes it sounds like folks are concerned about these private vehicles in public spaces. You know, that, you know, instead of the residents on the second floor might be on street parking. That actually wouldn't be, it doesn't get addressed by zoning anyway, that's really managed as public parking, that the town has control over in a separate means rather than through zoning.
Zoning could cause that residents who don't have parking will suddenly try to park somewhere. So it's
So
a chicken and egg situation.
and you could say right now that, you know, a residence that is in a particular property, that they are supposed to park in this parking lot way down there. And according to the whatever waiver they got from the planning board, that's where they're supposed to park. But the resident decides to not use that, they just decide to park right on the street. It doesn't matter whether they got a waiver, if it still becomes a problem. And that it would be managed by how the town chooses to manage its public parking.
And also the town's in a good position to control this well now, at least the way I look at it, because we don't have overnight parking for several months of the year. There's an expectation that as of a certain date, whatever bad behavior is going on, it will stop because those people will get ticketed and towed. So it's, you almost have to plan for the future. It can't be, get a resident permit and figure it out, so you oversubscribe residential permit part like you do in some neighborhoods of Boston and just kind of wing it. So we don't have people circling at night trying to find the mythical last spot because every other resident spot is full. That doesn't exist as a problem because we don't have overnight parking. Same way that Brookline doesn't have that problem because they don't have overnight parking.
And I think if you also look at a fine grain about exactly which properties we're talking about, it's maybe a handful at most that could even be converted to residential on the second floor that aren't already residential. So that it's maybe worried about something that is gonna be such a minute possibility. And it's only when they don't add square footage, aren't otherwise, transforming the building. So I think that the scale of the unintended consequences is gonna be so minute. And the benefits are gonna be outweigh whatever those possible consequences could be.
But to the point about that zoning parking policies versus public parking policies and how they can jointly work together, along with the, what the EVC is trying to, accomplish. It may be the demand for, second floor residential in Concord Center goes through the roof because they're seeing how that livens up, village centers. And the conversation with, Public Works Commission and the select board may be, okay, we don't want to have overnight parking in the winter on residential streets. Because of, the concern you talk about, but maybe it's, all right, just for, Concord Center, it's, half of the Kais Road parking lot in the winter, you can park on that half one night. And the following night, you can park in the other side to, allow Public Works to plow one and then the next day plow the other, but that's a policy question and, a procedural question on operations. That would be outside of what the planning board does, but would be a parallel track of conversation to trying to assist with, that economic vitality. So there's lots of ways to go about, having that conversation. I think,
Yeah, we have Carol Savoy online.
Yeah, hi, Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap. So on the residential parking, I know you think it should be a private problem and maybe they work it out and we only have no parking on the street certain months, but it's no parking on the street 6 months out of the year, right? The other 6 months out of the year, they can park overnight on the streets, I guess, right? And so if there's not parking, where are they going to park? So I know that we're saying, oh, it's only a handful, but it could be more. And I guess my concern is once you build it, the horses are already out of the barn and it's hard to put them back. So once you say, okay, it's going to be residential, then you have the problem. I would rather see the planning board and the EVC come up with a solution about what you're going to do for residential parking because you're bringing a warrant forward for combined business residential, which means it's going to open it up to residential. So I think you need to have an answer for what you're going to do on residential before you bring that forward. So that's sort of point number one. Point number two has to do with the commercial side of it. And I understand you say, if it's, whatever square footage is, one business moves out, another one moves in. But I want to give you some examples where that's happened and there's been a big increase in parking. And I think the first one that comes to mind was there was a French bakery cafe called La Provence for years on Thoreau Street. And they went out of business, but they had a restaurant and they had a takeout business and whatever. And then they left and Karma moved in. Well, it's the same square footage, but Karma is way busier than La Provence is. And it's open longer hours than La Provence is. And there's a lot more parking. They have more employees and they have more customers that go there, and they have a bigger takeout business. And we love Karma, but I'm just trying to show you, like, here's the unintended consequences. They need a lot more parking. In the same complex, there used to be Barefoot Books used to be on Thoreau Street where Target Painting is right now. And before that, it was a spa called La Belle Sante. And the spa didn't really do that much business, one or two people going in getting a spa treatment. And then Barefoot Books moved into the same square footage, and they had all these children's programs, and they had lots of birthday parties and all sorts of, things that drove their business. And same square footage, tons of parking, people dropping people off, picking people up. And it was a huge increase in parking. And the third example I'll give you is in West Concord, there was West Concord Market, which became Woods Hill Table. And West Concord Market, didn't really do that much business when it was a grocery store. But when Woods Hill Table came in, they have more employees, they have more customers, and require more parking. So I think all of these businesses in the old amendment had to come up with a parking plan. And in the new combined business residence that you have right now, all three of these examples would not require any more parking. And so what do? Well, it spills over into the neighborhoods, right? And that's what we want to avoid. So I think though the intent is good to be easier to do business with and have merchants come to Concord, I think you need to look at each business on a case-to-case basis. So I would argue that there's, whatever you call them, consequences that you wouldn't have anticipated that could greatly affect and drive parking. So I don't think it's like, it's not like one retail store moves in and another retail store moves out and there's in the same square footage and there's not an increase in parking. These are, solid examples of businesses that have changed over the years and parking that has increased significantly when they've done that.
Thank you. It is an interesting point of discussion. I will note that La Provence, the Karma did actually, I think, dramatically increase the amount of seats that were in there. I recall when I was on Public Works, they had to go before us to get some sort of waivers related to their sewer capacity because it was so much larger, something like 30 seats.
But it wasn't a change of use, was it?
But it wasn't a change of use, but it was a significant construction project as well that involved. Well, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a change of square footage. They were both restaurants, although La Provence really just served lunch, right? And Karma increased the seating capacity. La Provence was more of, a bakery, cafe, kind of lunch sort of place, but Karma's open till 11 o'clock at night, right? And they do a significant business there, but they didn't change the square footage. So under your new bylaw that you're bringing forward, a warrant article, they would be able to, basically just move in with, no change in parking and, or whatever, and the neighborhood would have to absorb that. And the same thing with Barefoot Books and Woods Hill Table, the Barefoot Books was a significant, they had a ton of like parties every single weekend and lots of kids programs. So there was a ton, same square footage, but lots more parking required. So I think I understand the intent, but I think that, with those things in mind, or those examples in mind, I would argue that each business still needs to be looked at, on its own merits versus just say, same square footage, just let the new guy come in.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments online or in the room? Okay. With that, we will move on to the next one.
Did you want me to bring the presentation up, Matt?
Actually, I was, if I can share,
You can,
Yeah,
right ahead.
there we go. So for this warrant article, there have been no changes to the wording of the proposed article
Correct.
or the explanation box. However, there have been significant changes to the content of the presentation. And so I was just gonna give you a quick update of the changes since the last time we talked. Continuing in my hope that the planning board would sponsor the article. So, the first thing is just laying out the goals. And, very clearly. So, the idea is to provide incentives that focus more on moderately affordable units. And then as a result, to reduce the investment that the developer would have to make in order to include affordable units in their development. Hopefully motivating them to create more affordable units, because what we find is there are very few being generated today. And there are none that have to be generated these PRDs don't require affordable units. So, one of the very first questions that I think came up several times last time was about the 40B threshold and how far away, we were, and whether we needed to have some sort of, escape clause or something if we got too close to the 40B threshold. And so I just ran the numbers on this. And so assuming that both of the 40Bs go through, you would need almost 4,000 additional market rate units in Concord before you'd hit 40B again. That's over a 50% increase in the number of units in town, housing units in town. So even with the MBTA housing, I don't anticipate that we'll get there. I don't anticipate that we'll ever get there in Concord with our current zoning, and even with MBTA zoning, there just aren't enough available lots to build out that much more housing. So I think we're done with 40B if these both get built. Okay, so our housing policy for the last 30 years has been built around stay above the 40B. No longer do we have to worry about that, assuming it gets built. We do need to worry though, what are our housing priorities? So, the next thing is that a lot of the numbers that I gave last time had errors. And thanks to Liz Rust, she has helped me correct these errors. So, I did it, with best intentions. I went out to the Mass Housing Partnership site, used those as income basis. I had an old version of her spreadsheet that I used to calculate the numbers for the unit prices. Anyway, she's given me the real facts. And so some of these numbers have been tweaked. A couple of interesting insights that today, the way that the 80% AMI is calculated, it's actually 87.5%. It's just because HUD doesn't do this in a straightforward way. They don't just take, okay, here's the 100% AMI number. What's 80% of that? No, they have this massive formula with all kinds of other things. And right now it's coming out to 87.5%. So that means that there's actually less of a difference to 110 that you might assume. And Mass Housing Partnership actually for 100%, they use a ratio from the 80%, but Concord doesn't. So the difference is a lot less than you would have expected, and that led to some of my mistakes in the past.
So what are you showing here then in the?
These are the
80%
real
column?
numbers.
So in the 80% column, that's actually 87.5%.
That is.
Okay,
So that's basically you have the thing, because if you tried to back out the numbers, it would look funny.
It would be wrong, yeah.
It would
yeah,
look
yeah.
wrong,
They look
even though it's
wrong,
correct.
but they're right. Okay, just saying. My original numbers looked right, but they were wrong. Okay, so, also it's good to know that, Concord's current housing, median household income is estimated about 195,000. And with the median household size of 2.8, that puts Concord's current residents at almost exactly 150% of AMI, Boston AMI, okay? So it's interesting because the top of the affordable threshold is the median of Concord. And that just says as well, we should find ways to incent developers to do this rather than subsidizing, because you've got tax-paying homeowners that might be subsidizing people that earn more than them to get affordable units otherwise. So that's, so you end up with these unit prices. The unit prices right now are actually depressed because of the high interest rates. Higher interest rates mean you have to, higher mortgage payment. You can't afford more of a mortgage payment, so it pushes down the unit price that there is. So it makes it a heavier investment, heavier lift for developers right now to create an affordable unit than almost ever. So that's key. You also can see that, the relative distribution of these units. One key point that Liz has made, and I think it's worth noting, is that while, of course, we have this increase in 40B, 80% AMI units, they're all rental. So, there aren't really incentives other than in the PRD to create ownership 80% units, but we do have a stock of them. We have 56 of them today. We only have 36 at the moderate levels. So I still think there's room to improve. Nothing's changed in the provisions, the references in the paragraphs, the wording. I did put in a summary of the history of these unit creation, and I created these sort of 3 columns. So basically affordable PRDs, those are the ones that the Housing Development Corp builds. And they can continue doing that, and they can continue to create 80% units in those. The whole economics, there's even a different section of the bylaw that applies to their stuff. The ones on the right are alternative PRDs. Those are the ones that are in the business district over Thorough, area, or that where they have to come in front of town meeting. So there's a different set of incentives for them to create affordable units. The ones that I'm talking about that apply to this are what we call conventional PRDs, the ones that are pure market rate. And you can see here that since 2014, there's only been 2 units created of affordable units in PRDs. And so this currently, I would consider to be a somewhat dormant part of our bylaw. Developers are not using this today. And so we need to make this functional again. So there are still opportunities as well to do a hybrid where they're market rate units, but then maybe the Affordable Housing Trust buys down a unit to the 80% level or something. Okay. I'll get past these other ideas. The other thing that I met with the Housing Development Corp, and one of the first things that they suggested was that I talk to developers. So I've had calls with 3 developers so far, and I've got more coming. But I've had great feedback over half-hour calls with each of the 3 that I've talked to so far. And they all said this is a step in the right direction. It would help. There are various feelings about whether it's not enough to really do it, to, oh, no, this is enough. We should be able to do this. But then other feedback I've gotten are just that it's awfully hard to do a PRD, and a lot of developers hesitate to do a PRD. Just they find the process onerous. They're not really confident that necessarily the planning board or the town is really on their side to help with this. That's one thing. And then the other is that the bylaw says it's up to 2 times density. And one suggestion I got was, could it just say 2 times density instead of up to? Because one of the other concerns is you don't know what the opportunity is. So you don't know whether, you can put on the table this many units because it's all sort of negotiable. And so there's just too many variables. So in other words, right now we say you could get up to a 2 times density bonus, but they don't know, well, does that mean 1.4? You know, does it mean 1.2? Does it mean 2.0? You know, it all seems very fuzzy. And so they thought, oh, if we just got rid of the words up to and just said two, of course, they don't have to use the full bonus, but that the idea is that they would know more what their opportunity is.
I don't think that's true. I think if it said 2 times, then they could either get a 2 times density bonus or no density bonus, and they wouldn't be allowed to have 1.8. I think that's what the words.
Well,
up
it is
to
still a
mean.
special permit, of course,
But that's not what the language says.
right? But it says increases beyond the
Well,
basic.
let's not
density.
get into that now,
Yeah.
because a change like that is not on the table for this year.
Right, and well, basically. Is what I'm getting from that.
Yes, but we
Okay.
would not make such a change now because
Get
it's
rid of the
too
two
late.
words up to.
I don't think we're contemplating adding a new article to modify the PRD portion of the bylaw today.
Okay,
That would
Uh,
have to happen at some future cycle. It's practically.
You couldn't add it to this warrant.
yeah, we
article
go
if
in
you
the same warrant
choose.
article.
Mhm.
It would be the
It's-
same warrant article.
Yeah,
Okay, but isn't it rather late for that?
I mean, it's kind of the same thing, up to versus two.
Well, listen, if you can uh, if you can have 1 or 2,
Yeah,
that
but-
doesn't mean you can have 1.5. You
Yes.
can only have 1 or 2.
no, what it's
No.
saying is, okay, if I've got a 10-unit
Uh-huh,
basic density PRD,
uh-huh.
can I come in with a proposal for 20?
Yes,
Can I
that's
only-
what up to means.
But would somebody read, hey, that's not appropriate for that lot, up to in this circumstance actually means 14?
Yeah, that's.
You know,
what I
that's
think
the
is
fear, I
concern.
think.
That's the
Well,
fear.
it's a special
Well,
permit
but-
process and it could be turned down
It can
entirely.
be turned
No,
down
right.
entirely,
But
but they just don't
I-
know whether they can put this on the table to start with. Yeah.
I like
Obviously.
that more because anytime there's wiggle room to say no simply because it's got too many units, you want to get people to the table. And if it turns out, you know, they come in with 20 and they all settle on 15, they weren't gonna come to the table for 15, but they're already in this deep. And they're already like, you know, feeling like, you know, 17, you know what I mean? It's, and also, if you look at the chart on the last page, it's every PRD from 1977.
Yeah.
And it's like 25. It's not enough to feel like anyone's really gonna run roughshod over this.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and the
Yeah,
other,
it's just-
the
yeah.
sites
But
we've got
that's what
coming
up
up.
to means. Everybody should come in and ask for double and,
Yeah, but if you're getting feedback from developers saying that's a scary word, and we're all agreeing that it means the same thing.
no, I'm specifically disagreeing. It absolutely, positively does not mean the same thing. You can override me, but it does not mean the same thing.
Well, but you're talking about you're right, but you wouldn't only consider 2 and 1. Right?
If the law says you can have either 2
But
or
that-
1, then you can't have 1.5.
But you don't have to exercise the full density bonus.
Right,
But that's not what it allows for.
So,
If-
right, you're
if-
right,
if
but
it
that's
says
up,
to,
but
then
you're
you
right,
can-
then
it
you
can-
can.
Anything in
But
between, but if it only says
you're arguing against a layman's interpretation of
the
what
English
up to
language.
means, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm making the argument that,
I
a
agree with your,
lawyer will screw us over if we go with just, oh, well, we'll just, pretend that language means what we feel like today. So, you can outvote me,
for
but
me, by the way, I'm not really here.
was by about 2 words, okay, up to.
Yeah, yeah.
I know, I
So this is
100%
that-
agree with your
that,
interpretation.
Argument about unintended consequences
right.
and discussion.
I, you know,
If the board is interested, I do see Sue's.
Oh.
Where it says, you can get a bonus density 2 times. I can pose the question to town council.
I 100% see what you're
Yeah,
saying,
if-
but if it's scaring off people, then it's not doing what it's supposed to.
well, if it's scaring off people, then we should, write
Educate
something
people.
clarifying, that's
Yeah.
not written into the bylaw. We should have some guidelines. We should find some different way of saying it, like, I can't think of something off the top
I
of
know
my
what you mean.
head, rather than just striking the words up to.
So let
But
me,
when-
let me
when
think
would
about
we
it.
Make a decision, like it should be 1.6 versus 1.8. I mean, I don't think we
Well,
try and fine tune for developers up to what 2 is, do we? And
Well,
we don't see that many of them, so I don't know how we could even,
sometimes somebody comes in and says, well, I wanna do this, and they get pushback of, but there just isn't room for that on this site.
well,
Yeah.
that's different.
And they have to
If
have
there's no
housing
rules
diversity,
and
so
if
all
they
of a
don't
sudden
All
it's
those
not.
other things, and it
the
ends
other.
up being less than 2
Right.
because of characteristics of the development, but that,
So you're saying that the implication would be that that would outweigh any other considerations in terms of numbers, that they automatically get 2, and it doesn't matter frontage or
oh, no, no,
sides
no,
or
I'm
parking or
arguing that they should
whatever.
always ask for 2, unless they really, really, really can't draw up a
Right.
plan for 2. And then
And then on what
that they should be
basis would-
granted 2 unless there is some reason having to do with site
Right.
characteristics or, affordability
meet some of
requirements
the-
or
There are
open
lots of
space or-
negotiations
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
special permit.
They're for a
I
special
mean,
permit, yeah.
The way the open space is set out, does
Yeah.
it have public access? There's so
But
many
here it
things,
seems to
right?
me when you're
This is
saying
just
up
one
to
dimension.
2, that's a discretionary number in and of itself.
Correct. But it's whose
Without-
discretion, that's, I think, the
It's
concern.
Right.
huge discretion just based on on what? On our feeling that, but not on these other.
No, the
countervailing
planning board isn't
issues.
allowed, and the zoning board of appeals aren't allowed to just have feelings, they have to have
Right, so,
reasons
so
behind
you get a
decisions.
double bonus,
Right,
and then, but obviously if you don't have enough space for parking, then you
All right,
can't
so
utilize
I'm
that.
I'm gonna
But,
spend some
okay.
time thinking about
You
this.
think about
Okay.
it.
Yeah, it's
But
not the core of my.
I get that.
It's an interesting point, though.
But,
Yes.
yeah, the last point being is that the bonus density, in other words, say, up to 2 times. It says you get a bonus density of 2 times. Does that mean you either get 2 times
Or not.
or
or
nothing,
nothing?
that's my problem.
Right.
That's what,
Yeah.
I think that's what the problem of striking those
Yeah,
words
yeah, and
means,
there may
so.
be problematic. By the way,
Okay.
I just wanted to say that was the interpretation a developer had.
Um,
Well,
Yeah.
No, but
and
I think
unfortunately,
what
there's
we're
issues
saying
that
is
we should
there-
address some other way.
We really would like to make PRDs work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And,
what.
and so if,
But
If-
it may also be just an
Yeah.
education
Yeah, it may be as what it
point,
is.
so let me, I'll
But
think about it.
yeah. Okay, and then I do wanna make, there was
Yeah.
one other point that I thought was great for the developers, which was, because one of the concerns I also had was, okay, well, is it because of the affordability level? Or is it just maybe that a density bonus is itself not a good incentive? And actually, no, they said density bonus is a good incentive, and in fact, it's a practical one in Concord. Because in a lot of sites, there is very low density from the base zoning, and so you can easily create a development that's not crowded. That, has this bonus density, and especially with a PRD type of design. And so they were very interested. In fact, not everybody was aware that this even was here. In the Bible. So,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I know.
Well, not the 3 people I know you talked to.
No, well, they weren't aware of the specifics, so. Anyway, that's where we're at, again, it's all at the same level, and then I, did present to the Housing Development Corp. They had a number of concerns, I think, again, as I mentioned with Liz about, are we giving up on ownership units? But my belief is no, those are still the kinds of units perhaps that they would be focusing on in their projects, or that can be created through alternative PRDs, or, like at sites like 2229 Main Street that have to follow the same process of going before town meeting. So I think there's still avenues, and we still have this huge problem of no moderate affordable housing. So.
Thank you. Is there any other questions from the board? Is there any questions from the gallery here or online? I don't see any hands.
Oh, yeah, Carol.
Oh, Carol, this way. It's meeting recording was covering that.
Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap Street. Could you, the slide number 3, could you go back to that, whoever was presenting?
Sure, just a second.
Perfect, thank you. So current means if Novo 40B goes through on Baker Ave, is that where the current 12.8 comes from?
Yes, because it's currently counted. Now, it could fall off. If it does
Right,
fall off,
right.
it's
Yeah,
likely
that's
it-
the concern. And I believe in the Concord Bridge this week, they said they had to pull a permit by April and that they weren't going to be able to do so. So,
Well, I think the town meeting's in June, so hopefully we'll know more by then.
right, but I'm just saying, if Novo falls off under the current, then we will be once again below the 10% and open to 40B, right?
No. So, we're currently, the state is doing the subsidized housing inventory, right now, and, currently, right now, we're at 10.01%. So we are above 10%, even without, Novo. But currently, the Board of Appeals is, the schedule for the Thoreau project, is to, have a decision rendered by April 6th, and filed with the town clerk. So, either way, we do not expect to fall below 10%.
Right, okay, so if Novo doesn't pull a permit, we'll be at 10.01. And if
Correct.
Thoreau gets a decision, a yes decision, we'll be at somewhere between, around 12 to 16, depending on what happens with Novo.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, so I guess my concern is, I understand the need for workforce housing and what you're trying to do here. I'm just, we fell below the 40B and we got Novo and, and Thoreau, right? Within 2 months, out of the blue. So if you say, okay, well, maybe Novo doesn't happen and maybe Thoreau does, I just feel like if we keep trying to say, okay, we're not going to do any workforce housing in these PRDs, any SHI housing, we're just going to do workforce housing, that makes me nervous that we could end up in the same spot again, right? I don't know, are we that comfortably over that we should just be ignoring the SHI units altogether here?
I think Liz Rust has her hand up. She may be able to speak to that issue. We can't see it in the room because there's a thing. blocking.
So can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Yeah, so Elizabeth and I corresponded today. I said that I would draft my comments in writing to the board. I want to thank Matt for putting this together, and we worked hard on some of these numbers and all that. And I think that workforce housing is a great goal, and this is a really creative way of encouraging more workforce housing. I wonder too, what's been brought up, whether this is the right time, given these 2 projects where even if the zoning permits are issued and then the building permits, then there's still the next threshold of occupancy permits before they lapse off. And I've just seen a lot of projects that don't make it through those thresholds for whatever reason. Sometimes the developers sell their projects off to someone else or whatever, don't actually end up building them. So, is the timing right for this change? I guess is really the piece. The SHI seems to be just a little unstable. There's also, MCI is a great place to think about workforce housing. And the other piece is I am, just to consider the implication for the low income ownership units that would be lost. And that the PRD has been really critical to creating those in Concord and taking away the tool. And just to really understand what that does to the Concord housing tools. Thank you.
All right, if I respond.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So two things. I mean, one is, this is a very modest proposal, so to speak. I think really realistically, we're only talking about creating 10 units over the next 15 years using this, but they're free units. They're units that developers pay for. So, you know, it's not going to really move the needle a lot, okay? It's just a sweetener, a helper. So that's one thing. And then the other that I just want to continue to emphasize is that while the PRDs have created ownership opportunities for low-income people, market rate PRDs have not. They really are not producing these units. And so I just think right now, this is an ineffective part of our bylaw. It's not doing anything. And so we're not losing anything by changing it because it's already lost.
And I think you mentioned that the affordable PRDs on the left are primarily, those are the ones built by the town, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
So,
those wouldn't be impacted
you
at
know,
all on the
right.
affordable side.
And again, they have their own bylaw provisions that, you know, they can continue to do exactly what they're doing and should. And that's where the lion's share of the low income affordable units come from.
Yeah, so we're talking the conventional, the 3 and the 2 number there,
That's right.
not the 28.
Yeah, I think
number.
that I mean, we had a little, you know, I think the alternatives would also be put in there. That was the Finnegan's Way and the Black Birch, which I think for this purpose, I think would count, but it's not a huge number. But Concord hasn't produced much of affordable housing overall at all. So any number is more than 0. So just to take away any of the zoning that creates the units is something. I mean, if you just look at this compared to what else Concord has created in terms of affordable housing, this is pretty much it. So, you know, so it's not like this compared to like, there's a whole pipeline of other things. There's the on paper 40Bs. So I'm just saying, just to look at it, you know, it in its totality. Right.
Alternative PRDs are covered by section 10.3 of the bylaw. It's a different provision.
Yeah, that's all.
Also wouldn't be affected by this change
No.
at any rate.
No.
And if I understand the point, it's that developers simply aren't building conventional PRDs at all with affordable housing. And maybe they would be more likely to if it was a little cheaper for them because the subsidy would be a little lower. So we might end up getting some kind of affordability where we would otherwise get none.
That's my theory. We don't know.
But we're not sure if that's true, and yet what we're throwing the dice on, well, not throwing the dice, but making an educated guess about is maybe 10 units.
Right.
And it's not affordable with a big A, but it's affordable with a small.
Right.
Moderate.
Some kind of
Some level of affordability that's just not there in the market.
That's right.
Mm.
Yeah, today, especially with tear downs,
Mm.
that, you know, we have a dwindling stock of moderate units. So, you know, it's difficult.
I just want to also point out on this chart, these are the permit years. So the actual occupancy are often 5 years later. So when you look at this and you say, oh, it was so long ago, but actually some of them are actually, like if you look at the conventional with those 1-1 that's in 2020, those actually just got occupied last year.
That's a very interesting point.
So that it's not, you know, like if you're looking at the historical perspective, the years are different from when you permit versus when people actually show up. There's a long time between that. So just as a point of reference.
Right.
Lots to think about.
Yep.
for your Public hearing.
A lot to think about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Awesome.
thank you. Well, I guess to the next several of these.
So there's the general housekeeping bylaw, which, Sue and I have been going back, there's, it really hasn't been any significant changes in that.
I threw in the repair garages parts to avoid us having to have a completely separate article for repair garages, but that's just consolidation.
Other than, again, finding different little formatting things with the warrant article. So that one was done. And the sign bylaw has not changed. Bless you, the floodplain conservancy district, we finally got our final determination letter from FEMA. The maps go into effect, July 8th, so that date was inserted. I did get an email this morning from our, FEMA floodplain coordinator, who's reviewed the whole entire bylaw, and it's got a thumbs up, so the date is the only thing that needs to
Well, I have
change.
a nitpick, which is call me ignorant, but I had to look up the community development department.
That's the new name.
That's the new name. Mhm.
Well, it's a department within the Division of Planning.
No,
No,
so we're,
I looked at the
currently,
town website, which might be out of date.
it's not, has not been updated yet.
All right,
But I imagine it will be updated by the
Okay.
time town meeting gets here, so.
then I withdraw my comment. That
Thank
I
you.
can't figure out what, but by then
So
one will
this-
be able to figure it out.
This department, which is currently Department of Planning and Land Management, will be named, renamed to Community Development Department.
Okay,
So, and that will happen before town meeting. And let me see, I'm gonna save the ADU for last.
Mhm.
And
Joint parking.
joint parking, so. Floodplains,
Is the scale really 1 to 14,000? It's such a random number. In the floodplain, I was just
Yeah.
commenting, the scale number was very strange.
So we
1
made
to
it consistent with,
14,000.
we made it consistent with the zoning map.
Yeah.
That's
I
all.
get it, but it seemed like an odd number. But I'm not gonna worry about it.
I don't know how.
I had one question
On
on
which one?
joint parking.
Oh, yep,
And I have to remember what it was, but I had a question about if you're sharing joint parking, okay, so say you have
Do you want to pull it up?
a building like is going down on Elm Street. And you have a restaurant, whatever, and a bank, and then you're gonna share joint parking. The bank to the restaurant, okay? What happens to handicap parking? Can that be part of joint parking? Should it be like somehow subtracted that joint parking doesn't include handicap spaces, that you have to have handicap spaces? I just was
yeah.
trying to
So
get
I'll
my
have to
head
ask
around
the,
that.
the building commissioner, because currently, when a project comes through. And let's say a development requires 100 spaces. It is, the Architectural Access Board, requirement that's for every hundreds, for every 10 spaces, you have to have one handicap. It's gotta be, van accessible. And so that's just the calculation.
but aren't there also requirements for where it's to be located? Put your handicap space at the
Which is
furthest part of the parking lot.
correct.
So
It's
if it
gotta
has to be within N feet of your business door, then if there's a joint parking facility, presumably each business's handicap spaces would still have to be within N feet of their door.
Correct. Which,
Right.
that's a
So,
site
yeah.
design perspective,
Right.
but I think to your point is, let's say. without joint parking, they need 150 spaces, and so, so they need 15
Oh, I see
handicap.
what you mean.
If there's only
With the
100
others.
spaces, but so. Then the same, but the
Just do we
same,
have to write
I don't,
something
I don't
in?
think
Think so?
so,
Okay.
because, the requirement for handicap spaces is just purely based on the number of parking spaces there are. So if you have a joint parking and based on the revised bylaw, and you're basing your required parking based on an hour by hour use, that says hour by hour, these uses together, the highest use is gonna be, 150 spaces, and you have to have 150 spaces. You're gonna have to have handicap parking based on your highest use and what you're providing. Outside of those hours, the use of the parking lot is gonna go down in both directions, and so will the requirement for handicap spaces. So I don't think just because you have joint parking means there's not gonna be enough handicap spaces. Cause your joint parking is gonna be based off your highest hour by hour use of the combined uses.
Okay. So like if I'm required to have 4 handicap parking spaces based on my highest use, I'll always have that.
Well, it's gonna be whatever, whatever the total number of
Between-
spaces in the development. Is. So if you have, so let's say,
But we face that
Cross-
paparazzi.
Paparazzi.
You're
Yeah.
basically saying at peak, it's gonna need 150 spaces, so you're gonna have to have an appropriate number of handicap spaces based on.
150
150.
spaces, yeah.
So
Oh.
regardless of, and presumably the architectural board would say, well, they can't all be on one side of the building and they all make.
But if
express-
use number one needs 7 spaces at its largest, and use number 2 needs 4 spaces at its largest, but those two uses don't overlap at all, unlikely, then you still would only have to have a total of 7 handicapped spaces.
7 parking.
Because,
7.
oh, I was talking
So it's
only
not-
here handicapped.
No, so number of handicap spaces has nothing to do with use. It only has to do with the number of spaces in the.
Okay,
parking
I
lot.
meant if
But that's dictated by the use.
If
is
use
what we're
num-
saying.
if
Well,
use number one,
Yes,
if use number one has an amount of is required to have an amount of parking that calculates to 7 handicapped spaces, and use number 2 calculates to 4 handicapped spaces, but somehow one of them is only open during the day and the other is only open during the night, you would only need a total of 7 spaces unless you had to have extra to have them in reasonable locations.
so I'd rather explain it
A
in,
different way?
you
Okay.
have one use that requires 10 spaces.
Mhm.
So for a parking lot with 10 spaces, I'm gonna say they need 1 handicap space. It's a building that's got 2 uses. The other use is another use that under just the zoning bylaw, that use requires 10 parking spaces. And they'd have to have 1 handicap space, but they apply as part of their site plan to do a joint parking. And they show their hour by hour use. This is a coffee shop, it's only open for breakfast and lunch, and this is a restaurant that's only open for dinner. Each one of them only requires 10 spaces, the joint parking. They want to build only 10 spaces, then they would only need 1 parking space.
One handicap parking space.
1 handicap parking space. Cause it's only based on the number of spaces.
And then you
But
just,
if they have entrances that are,
Oh, they might get required to have 2 handicapped spaces
if
on
it's too far.
separate grounds, but it
So
wouldn't be
that's
under
a
joint parking.
different requirement. So it's not just that they have to have 1 space. Architectural Access Board says your 1 space has to be within a certain distance. So they may have to design their site with 2 parking spaces to meet that requirement, which is a separate requirement.
okay,
And all we're really trying to do is make this available to more businesses. It already exists, okay, but it's specific to a few businesses. And we want to say that if you have other business types that can satisfy based upon a study and an hour by hour usage, then we should be able to let them do that. If you
Oh,
look at the
yeah,
bylaw right
I'm-
now,
I'm good with
okay,
Yeah.
everything else. I
Yeah,
just
okay.
didn't want
Good question.
anything
no, it's a good point. Yeah,
going
right.
awry in terms of.
The unintended
location.
consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay,
So
that's all.
I have a
Mhm.
So-
nitpicky little comment. Okay, go ahead.
So the one thing that was added from the last time the board discussed was, you know, and this was, something the consultant had, discussed with the board, was basically combining joint parking and off-site parking.
Mhm.
And so I looked at it and thought about it more, and it kind of becomes a little bit more challenging to get rid of both, combine both sections into one. So in the draft that everybody got, there's an added item F. That joint parking facilities may be located on separate lots, subject to the provision of 7727, which is the offsite parking requirement. And then, below that was, the 7727, and with potential amendments, currently off-site parking, which I wanted to ask the board, currently the section is titled location, which means absolutely nothing to me. So if the board wants to change the title to off-site parking, that's,
Let's do that.
that's fine with me.
Mhm.
I'll have to think about it and go through the whole bylaw to find out where it's, where it talks about 7727, but. It currently says the planning board may authorize an alternative location for non-residential parking. So my first question to the board was, this is where, you think about that dual path of conversation when the EVC has, the commercial parking requirement and the potential for combined business residents. And the example I gave, well, currently, if somebody has a residential use, this off-site parking, you wouldn't be allowed to do off-site parking for combined business residents, because you're talking about residential parking, not non-residential parking. So I didn't know if the board wanted to just strike the word non-residential and just have may authorize an alternative location for parking. And then it becomes that, that conversation during the review process. So this is a think about it between now and February 11th. And then, just also clarifying, that somebody needs to submit a copy of an executed lease with their building permit. And then,
Do you get drafts?
yeah, you'd be surprised.
Well, and that, if we're gonna be careful, we may as well, be really careful and say, a copy of the lease, comma, executed by all property owners and tenants, comma, shall be
Okay,
filed
so
with.
send me that one, that's
Okay,
even better.
yeah.
The change to item B is just to make the wording consistent with the new joint parking. And I think that's it. And I might delete from the warrant C and D, since there are no changes to that.
The changes in B are nice. That's much more clear, as to me what that means.
So if the board does want to include off-site parking, then, we'll just, the explanation would have to be expanded just a little to
include
discuss that change.
I'm not,
Really, I'm gonna have to stop talking soon.
there was some question as to whether we should bother with the last paragraph of the explanation or leave that to the presentation. I don't have a strong feeling about it, but I'd kind of be tempted to say, oh, leave it for the presentation, whatever though, I don't really care,
Yeah.
it's not important.
Well, I think it's fine to include it in.
The explanation,
In the explanation,
okay,
it was originally in the article,
yeah, that was,
so.
okay,
So, yeah, if you want any other potential edits, just send them my way. And then.
We have we'll start online this time with Carol Savoy.
Hi, Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap Street. So, could you bring up that article again, the explanation section, whoever had that up, that would be helpful. I just wanted to point to the explanation section. So, yeah, right there. Okay, I'm just trying to see where they list the type, okay, right there, yeah. So it says, the joint parking is for educational, religious, lodge, club, indoor amusement, restaurants that are used by banks, offices, retail, repair shops, service establishes, and other uses not normally opened and used or whatever. So you're trying to expand the scope of this in terms of the usage? What uses do you foresee that are not listed here that you would like, you think it needs to be changed to cover?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to go through the bylaw.
yes, but for one example, this would cover 2 banks or a bank and an office.
Yeah, a bank and an office would not be able to have joint parking
Currently,
currently.
The indoor amusement, okay, a bank, okay, because it says that are frequently used by banks and offices.
right, but only if only educational, religious, lodge and club, indoor amusement and restaurant that
With
are
those other uses, yeah.
Yeah,
along with the other. So one of them has to be from the first set and the other one has to be from the second set. But you can't have 2 from the second set, for
so
example.
you couldn't have joint parking for a bank and offices, or a bank and a retail store, or a bank and a repair shop.
Got it. Okay, that's what you're trying to do. So
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, I guess, my concern is what you just brought up. Originally, this said, I think, commercial or non-residential or something. My concern is you open it up to residential. Well, that's, somebody builds 1,000 units, like where is that joint parking gonna be, right? And if they don't provide the parking, where are you gonna put it? And, that's a whole nother conversation beyond just letting a bank and, a retail store swap parking if the retail store is open till 10 o'clock at night and the bank closes at 5, right? So I think, that is one concern. I'd like to limit it to, commercial use. And maybe, I guess even, on the joint parking, I guess this is different from like a parking waiver that CA got, right? This is saying that they actually have to park somewhere else and provide proof of that. Is that kind of what you're saying here?
So it goes beyond that. So even with the residential use, it's not that they're getting a parking waiver or that they just have to say, we're gonna park over there. They actually have to go through an hour by hour study and do a demand study based on an hour by hour use of parking for all of the uses. So let's say it's it's a mixed use and you have a commercial and a residential on the second floor, an hour by hour analysis. The highest hour by hour is going to be probably sometime on a Saturday where, most people are home. And so let's say it's, 5 dwelling units that needs 10 spaces, and then whatever the retail square footage and the hour by hour use. So they would have to document that hour by hour and provide the parking for the highest hour by hour use. So it's not that they're getting a parking waiver or that they just have, joint parking somewhere, it's based on an actual demand analysis, which is different than a parking waiver.
Right, but didn't like CA go out and count cars and said, we only need this and there's so many open
Well,
spots?
that's a parking waiver and that's different than joint parking.
Right, no, understood, but that was their parking analysis. They hired somebody to do that, right? And they came,
So
Hmm?
that's different than what this bylaw requires.
okay, well, I mean, my feeling is people can always game the numbers to get the result that they want. I know it sounds good in theory, they can, do this hour by hour parking analysis, but they just hire a consultant and tell them this is the result we want, right? So we can get this joint parking and relief from parking by having joint parking, by saying we really don't have this demand on these hours, right? So I think there's a lot of risk in this. I think, that it's wide and broad enough as it is today to cover the parking usage for the businesses that are here. I would suggest you don't bring this one forward, and if you do, limit it to commercial only, not residential.
Thank you. And we had one more comment in the room.
Yeah, 50 Belknap. Generally, I think it's a good idea to be smarter in parking use. I'm more interested in the interworking again of the different articles put forward. Let's assume you have a situation here, it's all measured out, yeah? Two uses, different times of the day, all works fine for 3, 4, 5 years. And suddenly one of the parties moves out. And according to the other article in bylaw, whoever moves in without changing the footprint inherits the prior thing. There's no further parking requirement. Or do I read this differently?
No, so the joint
Yeah.
parking, the revised bylaw requires if there is a change in tenants. And then,
So that overrides the other.
yes.
Is this written somewhere?
So the parking requirements basis, what the number of spaces would be. And the joint parking section is its own standalone section. So if somebody goes through, they need approval from the planning board to have joint parking. And part of their permit when they get a building permit, they have to provide, for the planning board review, the board will review a draft lease for that joint parking, or a plan for the joint parking if it's, different owners of a property. And so if a tenant changes before that tenant is, allowed to get a building permit to change that tenant, they would have to provide the hour by hour documentation.
But
That
even
is
if
the
that
same.
other thing is
It doesn't,
in there.
it-
Well,
No, that, I'm not getting that.
when I look at D, it says, it requires, review and approval by the building commissioner, but for a change in use,
Yeah,
not change in tenant.
yeah.
Now,
But don't,
of
wait,
course,
excuse me. That-
between,
but it-
as long as use doesn't change, we
No.
currently do not require any change in parking
It-
anyhow.
requires a signed lease.
Between
And if you change tenants, you're gonna have to have.
a new signed
a new
lease.
signed lease.
And particularly if we write into it, as Elizabeth suggested, lease executed by all property owners and tenants.
And we
It
always-
explicitly covers.
We always have the opportunity down the road, if there is an issue, and if the building commissioner gets complaints from neighbors or whatever, that the parking isn't sufficient for what's going on there, we can go back and review the process, okay? So, there
Yeah, but
are,
I think that needs to be
So I think it
clearer
is covered, but
about
in the
these
presentation.
discussions.
In the presentation.
that
absolutely.
there's also kind of a safeguarding,
Yeah.
to otherwise people don't understand there's a way to go back and make revisions.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to make a comment. I think there's a principle that a lot of these articles are about, is about building parking for the maximum that will ever be needed. And especially thinking about issues around stormwater management, and how to be able to use our available commercial property to its best use. We want to right-size our parking for what is normally used. So it's a little bit like, I have a big party every New Year's Eve, and I'm gonna buy a house big enough for everybody that's coming to the party, rather than how I live every day. And that's kind of how we're saying, let's build our parking for the biggest party we're ever gonna throw, rather than thinking about the uses that are on a regular basis. So I recognize that's not part of this ordinance, but I wanna kind of put that out there for us to kind of think about how we're understanding how to scale parking as a regular manner of use, and that we can think about those kind of temporary parking demands, how to address those rather than planning for them all the time.
But the problem is everybody drives around downtown Concord looking for parking spots and says, oh, there isn't enough parking here. I can tell you the last study that was done was a decade ago, okay? And we've had this discussion. They said in that commercial area, there was like 3,125 available parking spots, okay? The highest usage was like 2,100, okay? So, we're just not utilizing the parking problem, okay? We've talked about, Concord Market over here. We built that big parking deck there, okay? Never used, okay?
You're proving my point.
Well,
Exactly. We've got a lot-
We've
Exactly,
had
but
these
one of the
discussions.
problems is fragmentation, and joint and off-site parking would help with the problem where there's a parking space over here, but the person can't use it because they want to use this use over here. So this won't help a lot, but it'll help a little,
Yeah, it's not a big deal.
yeah. And to your point, this April 19th, parking will be a disaster.
yes.
If we had built enough parking spaces to cover this April 19th, we wouldn't have anything in town but parking spaces.
No, it won't be, because there won't be any cars.
They're gonna close down downtown.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there won't be any cars.
I think it's just at least in part of the neighborhood here is, that came up, the experience with the CA parking. It is there, yeah, and that there was a consultant or whatever measuring and saying it's enough parking. And the experience shows it's not enough parking.
But it's
So-
also
But
extra
it's also
bad
under
while we're waiting for them to finish the
Yeah, it's,
construction and
yeah,
open the
but
new
you
one.
have to,
Yeah.
you have to recognize there is a perception
Oh, yeah.
with citizens. And there's a fear that if you have more of them and consultants can say whatever they wanna say and you can tweak numbers, yeah.
It's a problem with the asymmetry, because
Yeah.
the person who drives around and can't find the parking space clearly sees that. But the person who drives around and doesn't get to shop at this business because it's actually a parking lot never notices that they lost the opportunity to enjoy
Mhm.
business or a home or some other thing because we overbuilt the parking. It's very hard to
Yeah.
make it clear,
Yeah.
yeah,
But we have to acknowledge there's some,
Oh, yeah.
it's true,
Yeah.
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 You're right.
Carol Savoy?
Yeah, I still go back to CA, it's not joint parking, but they did a parking study and they said we only need so many spots and they got a parking waiver. And you can drive by CA, any day of the week. And it's full from CA all the way down to Thoreau Street, and they're spilling over onto Academy. You can't even get two cars down Academy because they're lined up taking half the street and parking. They're down Middle Street, they're down Belknap Street, and it's very apparent when they go on, on school break, it's like a ghost town. All those spots are open, plenty of parking, they come back. You can't find a spot in front of the library or all the way down the street. So I know you think we have this abundance of parking, but people want easy parking. That's why they live in the suburbs. That's why they live in Concord. If they wanted to fight for parking, they'd live in Boston or Cambridge or somewhere else. So I know we're trying to support our businesses by saying, oh, you don't need all this parking, but if people can't find parking, they're gonna go to the strip mall, they're gonna go to the mall where there are parking spots and not shop in downtown Concord. So I think you really need to think long and hard about, you know, a lot of these parking changes, because you're making, you know, the first one you're proposing about, you know, the combined business resident change of use. Well, you know, I gave you several examples of where, you know, Karma requires lots more parking than what was there before. You know, now you're talking about joint parking, that's taking more parking spots away. So each one of these things incrementally adds up to less and less parking. So it's not even, you know, taken one at a time. You have to look at the incremental effect. So again, I think this joint parking, people game the numbers all the time to get what they want, particularly developers, to get more units in. And if they can come up with, you know, joint parking here and there is going to take care of my parking, you know, requirements, so I don't have to build as many parking spots, they're going to do it. So I would say, you know, leave the joint parking, and, you know, I would also leave the change in use that we talked about earlier till another date when we can look at this more holistically with all the development that's going on in town with MCI and MBTA that's coming online, and the Novo 40B and the Thoreau and 229 Main Street. You know, I think you just need to look at it in its totality, because there are going to be so many units of new housing being built that this could have lots of unintended consequences for the town. And it needs to be looked at more strategically, as in terms of, you know, a strategic town plan, not incrementally like we're doing today.
Thank you. So a lot for us to discuss at the public hearing, I think. So, with that, is the last one the ADU?
Last one is the ADU. So the bylaw that, the board got, there weren't any additional, well, I don't think there were any additional edits that you hadn't seen before. But Linda did raise a question to me that I sent on to town council, and right now, any edits between now and February 11th is going to be a conversation between town council and the new regulations that EOHLC has put out. And to Linda's first question, had to do with the square footage, and because the law says 900 and the board had talked about, you know, going to 1,000, and the protected, what the state's calling protected ADU, and there was language in the regulations that said, you know, if it was a protected ADU, but then you could have I'm gonna say, I don't know the exact word, regular ADU. So does that mean now you can have 2 ADUs? So in the regulation, they did correct that language. So now it's specifically.
Wait, you mean very recently?
Yeah. It specifically says special permit for multiple ADUs on the same lot, notwithstanding the CMR section. If a municipality chooses to allow additional ADUs on the same lot as a protected use ADU in a single family residential zoning district, zoning shall require a special permit for the use of land or structures for the additional ADUs. So town council says accordingly, where Concord's ADU bylaw does not currently allow for additional ADUs on the same lot, this provision is not a concern, and the board need not make any changes in response to that provision. So that was a good thing. The last item that we will be continually discussing with town council and the building commissioner is the new ADU regulations from the state. Only in the ADU regulations, they are defining the definition for gross floor area. I did an analysis of the state's definition and our town definition. We're fine with, it's the sum of all areas. Both those are the same. we're fine that it's measured by the building code. The state says building code, ours just says, 6'8". Ceiling height is 6'8". We're fine there. The one space where ours is more restrictive is ours measures exterior wall to exterior wall. The state's definition is interior face of the exterior wall. So, that's not a significant, we're talking 6 inches one way or the other. So, I'll speak to the building commissioner tomorrow on how we address that. The state's definition excludes garages, which that's one of the amendments, that's not a problem. It excludes crawl spaces. Well, that's not a problem because crawl spaces are never have a ceiling height of greater than 6'8", so I didn't see a problem there. The last one is attics, enclosed porches, and similar spaces, which they're not defining similar spaces, so. So my last question back to town council, and I'll speak to the building commissioner, is in our bylaw, if we add unheated, I think what they mean by excluding those areas is it's not habitable space, it's unheated attics, enclosed porches are not heated, it's not conditioned habitable space. So that's the last item that I think we kind of need to iron out. After that, our bylaw complies with the law and the regulations.
So they're saying the square footage of those either attic or enclosed porches does not incorporate into their 900 or 1,000.
Correct. Yep, so the square footage, it's excluding, so the sum of the areas of all stories of the building of compliant ceiling height pursuant to the building code, so that's a 6'8", including basements, lofts, and intermediate floored tiers measured from interior face of exterior walls or from the center line of walls separating buildings or dwelling units, but excluding crawl spaces, garage parking areas, attics, enclosed porches, and similar spaces.
What's an interior floor tier? Is that like a stair turn or something? Like
I
a
think so.
platform, like something like that? Like,
Yeah,
okay.
probably. Our definition reads the sum of the horizontal areas of the floors of all building measured from the exterior face of exterior walls or from the center line of a wall separating two buildings, not including any space where the floor to ceiling height is less than 6'8". So,
I'm terrible at math. I did some very rough math, which is probably completely wrong. If exterior walls are 6 inches thick, that's something like 50 square feet. The difference between exterior wall versus interior wall. If I'm right, then should we switch to 950 instead of 1,000 to make it still be 1,000 under our old definition? I'm probably totally wrong on the math and it doesn't matter.
I'll
It's immaterial, it's not gonna make that.
It's true. It
So-
really won't.
so
Make the
the-
person.
So the other option is
Yeah.
to leave, our definition for gross floor area. And add a separate definition.
for the
gross
protected use.
Floor area for ADUs and have it be the same.
Okay.
I prefer not to go that direction, so, so it may be, just amending our, I need to find out more about, attic, enclosed porch
Ah.
and similar spaces. I think they're talking about, unconditioned, unheated space such as, an attic is it just a pull downstairs?
Not an attic that someone has converted to a playroom, loft, study,
Right.
office. Yeah.
Correct.
Unless it's below 6'8".
So that's
Unless it's
where
below
we're at with
6'8".
the ADUs. Did you have anything?
And we have to abide by their regulations, correct? Their
At a minimum.
regulations supersede ours.
Correct.
The thing about the porches is that could add significantly to the size of the property. Now, it still has to meet the square footage of the lot, you know, that requirement between the primary house and the ADU, okay? But you could put a really fancy porch on an ADU, you could put,
But you could also use a porch as like an unheated porch as a connector between two buildings, like we don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I see the logic in actually that being positive, that you've now integrated it better, and I don't know, it just.
there's nothing we can do about it.
I see it
anyway.
as not being a big
Yeah.
deal, I mean, you could, it's still gotta fit,
Somebody can already put a giant porch on their primary
yeah,
residence.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Um,
I'm sorry.
I'm assuming you don't want to do this, but I'm gonna ask, and that is under, I guess, L, when you can prohibit use as a bed and breakfast or tourist home, you don't want to put short-term rental in there as well.
We don't have a definition of short-term
know.
rental, and we don't have a short-term rental bylaw. But for the last,
Forever.
I don't know, since Airbnbs have started, that's a tourist home. So that's how the building commissioner has consistently interpreted short-term rentals as tourist home.
I understand that. I just think there may not relate the two, and therefore, if they look at our warrant article, you know, if they're gonna build, they will not perceive when they're building an ADU that it can't be used for short-term rental, because it doesn't say that.
I'll,
It's
you know,
just,
I'll ask.
You know, it's
yeah.
just,
I'll ask
don't know.
town council about adding that. You know, can it be added even though
you
we
don't
don't have a
define
definition of
it.
it?
Yeah,
We do have
I mean, it's-
definitions in an appendix to the zoning bylaw.
I mean, you can say
Of course,
whatever.
people
is
don't read
defined
that.
as-
It's it's
as in-
clear you
in
can't do it
Mass
in,
general
in,
law, there's a definition, so
Yeah.
you could
And
refer
if-
to that, but
and the math doesn't.
And if somebody
I'll-
built one
I'll
and tried
ask.
to do that,
Yeah.
they'd get in
It's
trouble,
just-
And the
but,
math doesn't work, yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I will ask.
It would be worth putting in our presentation at town meeting that
That
tourist
doesn't affect
home
that.
means
Yeah.
short-term rental.
Yeah.
According to the building commissioner.
we'll go to online comments, Carol Savoy.
Carol Savoy, 61 Belknap Street. I believe whatever the regulation is that we have to comply with, it's only 900 square feet. We went to 1,000. And I believe previously the one that we approved at town meeting was 750 square feet. And it was like one parking spot, 750 square feet, but then the state came out with a regulation that we have to comply with that said it has to be 900 square feet and no parking within half a mile of a train station. So we lose the parking spot and we have to increase the square footage. So I guess, why are we going over and above what, you know, we already approved? I know we have to meet what the state is asking, but why don't we just go with the bare minimum, which is the minimum requirement the state is requiring, which is 900 square feet versus 1,000 square feet, particularly since we have to give up parking.
Yeah, one thing that is worth mentioning, we just discussed it briefly, is depending on the shape of the building. The state measures that number differently than we do in town, so that the variance between the differences, you know, one is to the outside of the walls and one is the state's numbers to the inside of the walls. So where you have 6, or if the person's going for reach, 8-foot or 8-inch thick walls, it reduces the amount of square footage, so it can vary 50 to 70 square feet, simply taken up by the way that things are measured. Additionally, the board had discussed earlier, originally, the ADU bylaw had 750 square foot by right with up to 900,
No, up to 1,000.
up to 1,000 by special permit. Where the state was now requiring us to go to 900, and the number of special permits was like 3. And they were all based on the specifics due to the lot size and, you know, this thing that, the preferred layout. It didn't seem like it was prudent for us to have a special permit requirement for an additional 100 square feet. And
Particularly since it's onerous not only for the applicant, but also for the planning board or the ZBA
yeah.
or.
Didn't we have
yeah.
several of them that were like 940 or something?
or like 903,
Right.
you know, it was like they were
Yeah.
just over the line of
Based
what,
upon the historic.
right, the historic numbers.
Right.
Way
They
too
were
onerous.
larger than a 750, obviously, but where it's, you know, 900, it's like a rounding error.
Yeah.
So,
Got it.
That-
So you're
that was
going
a
to
lot.
1,000 and dropping the special permit altogether?
yes, yeah, there's no special permit ability, other than the special permit, which was for
The
some
waivers.
non-conforming lots that required a special permit, I believe.
Got it. And you're
Or
going
yeah,
1,000 because of the way they measured to give you,
that was a part of it
yeah,
that we
okay,
learned today.
thank you.
I don't know if anyone else had any other comments or thoughts.
What we covered.
Awesome. What I like to hear.
I think that's it.
Awesome.
Minutes.
Yes, so we have 4 sets of minutes. Which I reviewed and I saw that they all had Sue's initials on them, so assuming you saw them as well. So I have the October 1st, October 1st, 2024, November 1st, 2024, December 17th, 2024, and January 7th, 2025. And I would look for a motion to approve those, provided no one else had any other comments.
Move to approve them.
And do we have a second? A second. And we will do a roll call vote since we are partially remote. So Mark,
Yes.
Sue,
Aye.
Linda,
Yes.
Rob,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
and I too am an I. So with that, we have all of the minutes approved, and I believe that's the last item on our agenda.
That's it.
Awesome.
Adjourn.
job.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming.